From its chaotic formation in 1948 to the current political disputes and ongoing tensions with Palestine, the history of Israel is a controversial topic. A small country with limited resources and military power, fighting for survival, and yet wielding significant power globally. Israel's rich history, spanning thousands of years, is not just fascinating, but also embodies turmoil, resilience, and fortitude. This land has been shaped by multiple civilizations, religions, and cultures, ranging from the ancient Kingdom of Israel to the modern-day nation-state. In this video, we'll discuss the crucial events and factors involved in its formation. We'll look at the complex and contentious journey that led to the realization of the Zionist dream, a dream of establishing a Jewish homeland after centuries of oppression and displacement. But is this dream becoming a nightmare? Let's start by briefly delving into the past and understanding the foundation of Israel. The Canaanites, Philistines, and Israelites were among the ancient peoples who lived in what is now known as Israel. The Israelites, who first appeared as a distinct tribe around 1200 BCE, created a monarchy that lasted for generations and left an enduring mark on the region's culture and religious beliefs. Israel was dominated by a series of empires over the centuries that followed, including the Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans. The Roman invasion in 63 BCE signaled the beginning of an era of the Jewish diaspora, during which the Jews were dispersed across the world due to persecution and forced exile. You might thus be wondering, how did Israel come into existence then? Despite the dispersion, some Jewish communities remained in the area, and Jewish identity and culture survived in the region. In the 19th century, a movement called Zionism emerged among Jewish communities, advocating for the formation of a Jewish homeland in the land of Israel. This movement gained traction in the early 20th century and created significant political pressure on the international community. So much so that by 1947, Palestine was to be divided into two states, Jewish and Arabic. This decision was met with strong opposition from both the Arabs and the Jews, and eventually sparked a conflict lasting to this day. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The origins of the modern state of Israel go back to when the League of Nations granted Britain a mandate over Palestine, including Israel's current lands, to establish a Jewish homeland after the First World War. The mandate, however, also required Britain to protect the rights of the Palestinian Arab population and to promote their political and economic interests. Palestine underwent significant changes as a result of the British mandate. The region's population grew as Jews from around the world sought refuge and took the opportunity to establish a new homeland, often through outright land purchases. The British government initially welcomed Jewish immigration, viewing it as a means of developing the region and strengthening its presence in the Middle East. Arab Palestinians, on the other hand, saw Jewish immigration as a threat to their land and way of life. Unsurprisingly, tensions between the two communities quickly grew. As Jewish immigration increased, the policies of British authorities also shifted. They became more restrictive and led to the Parsfield White Paper, issued by the British government in 1930, which limited Jewish immigration and land purchases in Palestine. This policy, of course, infuriated the Jewish community, sparking widespread protests. Tensions grew over the following years, and by 1936, the Arab leaders had called for a general strike and a campaign of civil disobedience to protest Jewish immigration, as well as demanding an end to the British mandate. The British responded with a repressive policy, including military actions, curfews, and collective punishments, which further fueled violence and unrest. The Arab Revolt, as it is called, which endured for 3 years, stands as a watershed moment in Palestinian history, marking the beginning of a new era in the conflict between Jews and Arabs. In response to the Arab uprising against British officials and Jewish settlements, a heavy-handed military policy was implemented, accompanied by the creation of special courts to punish Arab insurgents. Collective punishments, including home demolitions and fines, were frequently employed. This chapter in history is a dark one, with numerous lives lost, and had a long-lasting impact on the Palestinian community. History would, however, add more fuel to this fire. During World War II, the increasing significance of the Middle East prompted the British to recognize the strategic and geographical importance of Palestine. Consequently, they altered their policy towards Jewish immigration, with the goal of strengthening their geopolitical position in the region and gaining the support of the Jewish community. The Holocaust, of course, also had a significant impact on the acceleration of Jewish immigration and support for a Jewish homeland. With news spreading of the Nazi atrocities against Jews, there was growing backing for the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. The influx of Jewish immigrants seeking refuge from Europe also increased tensions with the Arab population, adding fuel to the conflict that culminated in the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. The British Mandate, which failed to resolve the dispute between Jews and Arabs, ended in 1948. Despite establishing some institutions and infrastructure, it ultimately became a source of conflict between the two groups, each vying for control of the land. This laid the groundwork for the next phase of geopolitical tensions that ultimately led to the 1948 Arab-Israeli War and the establishment of Israel. Before we talk about the war, though, let's look at the international power plays that led to it. In November 1947, the United Nations made a historic decision to partition Palestine into two separate states, one for Jews and one for Arabs. The partition plan that was laid out originated in the Balfour Declaration of 1917, in which the British government promised to support the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. The UN-sanctioned partition resulted in a Jewish state covering approximately 56% of Palestine and an Arab state covering the remaining 44%. Jerusalem was designated as an international city under UN administration. This decision was the result of years of political, social, and economic changes in Palestine, and was heavily influenced by pressure from some of the most powerful nations in the world, including the United States, China, and Russia. As 3 of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, these nations played a critical role in the partition decision, though all for their own reasons. President Harry Truman of the United States, in particular, was a strong proponent of the establishment of a Jewish state, largely due to political pressure on the domestic front. China, too, supported the partition plan, as they believed that the creation of a Jewish state would bring peace and stability in the region. Lastly, the Soviet Union saw the partition plan as an opportunity to advance its own interests in the region and to gain influence in the newly created states of Israel and Palestine. The Jewish community welcomed the partition plan with joy and celebration. Arab leaders, on the other hand, opposed the plan and in turn launched attacks on Jewish settlements, resulting in a fully fledged civil war breaking out. The conflict continued until May 1948, when Israel declared its independence, thereby triggering the start of the Arab-Israeli War. The partition plan was a watershed moment in Palestinian and Middle Eastern history. It marked the end of British rule in Palestine and the beginning of a new era of conflict between Jews and Arabs, which would have far-reaching consequences. It ultimately set off a chain of events that have shaped the political and social landscape of the region to this day. The early years of Israeli statehood were marked by the ongoing conflict with neighboring Arab countries and Palestinian statehood movements. Despite these challenges, Israel's economic and political development continued, with David Ben-Gurion serving as the country's first prime minister. The economic policies included promotion of industrialization and agricultural development, which resulted in a growth of the country's exports. Consequently, foreign investment also flowed in. Politically, Israel also established a parliamentary system of government, with multiple political parties forming. Alongside this, the fledgling nation worked on establishing diplomatic relationships with other countries and asserting its position internationally. This was necessary for the country's development and survival, considering the geographical location of Israel, surrounded by hostile Arab states which refused to acknowledge its existence. One of the first examples of Israel asserting itself as a geopolitical power in the region came in 1956, when it joined forces with France and the United Kingdom in what is known as the Suez Crisis. A military campaign was launched against Egypt with the goal of regaining control of the Suez Canal, which the Egyptian government had nationalized. From the perspective of Israel, this would help weaken Egypt, a supporter of Palestine, in their fight against Israel. The move drew widespread international condemnation, including from the US and the Soviet Union, and eventually led to Israel's withdrawal from the Sinai Peninsula. The Suez Crisis was a turning point in Israel's international relations, though, highlighting the complexities of the country's regional and global alliances. This, though, did not deter Israel from asserting itself further in the region, adding to the already potent combination of factors which stoked tensions over territory and resources, ideological differences, and the ongoing conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, to name but a few. These factors were the fuel behind the rising animosity between Israel, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, which were escalating following the Suez Crisis. With tensions rising and militant groups carrying out terrorist attacks against Israel, the environment was hostile and unstable, to say the least. By May 1967, Egypt had expelled UN peacekeepers from the Sinai Peninsula, which raised fears of an impending attack on Israel, leading to the 1967 Six-Day War. The Six-Day War, though brief, was a devastating conflict that resulted in significant bloodshed and reshaped the geopolitical balance of power. Israel emerged victorious, having defeated several Arab nations, including Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, and taking control of a large swathe of land. The defeat was a humiliating blow to the Arab world and undermined the credibility of their leaders, who had promised to destroy Israel. Furthermore, the conflict resulted in the expulsion of a large number of Palestinian refugees by Israeli forces, leading to ongoing tensions and disputes over territory and the right to return. This tension and dispute over territory, resources, and Palestinian rights eventually led to the Yom Kippur War of 1973, when Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel, catching them off guard. The majority of the fighting took place in the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights, which Israel had taken control of in 1967. Egypt's initial goal in the war was to establish a presence on the eastern bank of the Suez Canal, and then use this position to negotiate the return of the rest of the Sinai Peninsula from Israeli occupation. This war resulted in a significant number of casualties, with estimated deaths ranging from 8,000 to 18,000. The aftermath of the Yom Kippur War prompted a shift in Israel's foreign policy towards achieving peace with its Arab neighbors. The continuous conflicts with Arabs had caused a lot of damage to Israel's economy and society, and they desperately wanted to end this cycle of violence. Israel also recognized that they could not always dominate the Arab states militarily. This resulted in Israel beginning to pursue a series of peace treaties with neighboring Arab countries in the late 1970s. Egyptian President Anwar Sadat took the first step by traveling to Jerusalem to talk to the Israeli Knesset. This effort towards peace treaties culminated in the historic Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt in 1978. The Oslo Accords of 1993 marked another significant step in Israeli-Palestinian relations, leading to the establishment of the Palestinian Authority and ushering in a new era of negotiations between the two parties. The signing of the Accords was a result of years of back-channel negotiations between Israeli and Palestinian officials, with the goal of achieving a lasting peace agreement. Despite some initial progress, the peace process had been marred by ongoing violence and setbacks, with both sides failing to reach a final agreement. Nonetheless, the Oslo Accords and subsequent negotiations represent a continued effort towards finding a peaceful resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. One major factor contributing to instability in the region are the internal divisions within Israel. The assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1995 by a Jewish extremist who opposed the Oslo Accords and peace treaty was a major blow to the peace process. It is also a potent example of the deep social divisions that exist within Israel. In recent years, there have been several attempts to restart the peace process, such as the 2013 to 2014 Israeli-Palestinian peace talks, led by US Secretary of State John Kerry. However, these attempts have largely failed to bring about any lasting progress or resolution to the conflict. Meanwhile, Israel has faced international criticism and scrutiny for its treatment of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Many international observers, including the United Nations, have accused Israel of violating international law and committing human rights abuses against Palestinians, including the demolition of Palestinian homes, the construction of illegal settlements, and the use of excessive force against Palestinian protesters. Israel, on the other hand, argues that its actions are necessary for self-defense against Palestinian terrorist groups like Hamas, which frequently launch rocket attacks on Israeli civilian areas. Israel claims that it targets only Hamas militants and not civilians, and that Hamas uses civilians, including children, as human shields. However, human rights groups have documented cases where Israeli forces have targeted civilian areas, resulting in the deaths of innocent Palestinians. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains one of the most enduring and contentious issues in the Middle East, with no clear resolution in sight. It is further complicated by a volatile domestic political landscape that is shaped by various interest groups, with competing priorities and agendas. One of the most visible interest groups in Israeli politics is the settler movement, which advocates for establishing and expanding Jewish settlements in the West Bank and other disputed territories. However, settler groups have been a major source of friction in Israeli-Palestinian relations, with many Palestinians viewing them as illegal and impeding the establishment of a viable Palestinian state. Another important interest group in Israeli politics is the ultra-Orthodox community, which represents 12% of the country's population and wields significant political power. The ultra-Orthodox groups have often opposed progressive reforms, including efforts to increase military service among the ultra-Orthodox population and to increase access to secular education. However, in recent years, Israel has seen the rise of a new generation of progressive political groups, including the Meretz Party and the Arab Joint List Coalition. These organizations have advocated for various progressive causes, such as LGBTQ rights, protecting the environment, and greater recognition of the rights of Israeli-Palestinian citizens. Despite the diversity of Israeli political interest groups, many share the goal of promoting the Jewish state's security and prosperity. However, their differing priorities and approaches have frequently resulted in intense political and ideological conflict within the country. Needless to say, these domestic issues only add to the complexities of the already volatile situation in the region.